But this is far more interesting. It's a colonel on the line. It is a colonel. How are you this morning? I didn't know whether we'd gotten ourselves all confused, but I'm so delighted to have you with us. You are a retired US Air Force Colonel Towner-Watkins. Is it Roxanne?
Yes, Roxanne. Thank you.
Lovely to have you with us, Roxanne. Thank you for joining us. I'm so grateful. Operation Gladio, which is why you've joined us today. I must admit, I didn't know a great deal about it. It had been brought to my attention about a year ago. And I looked at it and I was like, that's insane. These people, they were planning all of this. But you're going to do a proper deep dive for us because I think it's the type of thing that our viewers will love to know more about. So a bit of background, first of all. Anyone out there familiar with Operation Gladio? We'll get ready for an education. This one involves the CIA, the Vatican, false flag operations, deep criminality. This is the PSYOP operation to end all PSYOP operations in many regards. And as I say, let me welcome in lovely Roxanne, who is here with us today. Some people will struggle to believe what we're about to talk about, but I can assure you this is 100% real, shockingly so. Yes, Roxanne?
Yes. Thank you for having me. Even if people like yourself and I spent 30 years in the United States Air Force, and I have 6 different degrees. I'm an avid reader. I went to I have 2 master's degrees, one of which is in business and another one in strategic studies from the Air War College, which is a year-long in residence. You go to Montgomery, Alabama, and you learn all about world history as it relates to military, economic, and political unrest all over the world. And so you think, after all of this education, that you're fairly up to date on most major military involvement in different operations around the world. And so about 2 years ago, I was reading a book called The Third Way, and they talked about stay-behind units. And I'm like, stay-behind units? What is that? I've never heard of it. And it was talking about World War II. And again, I've spent a lot of time reading about World War II.
Wow, this is how deeply covered it is then, that even somebody with your background and experience
never heard about it. So another very ironic point in all of this. I did a search on stay-behind units, and I came up with this guy's book right here, Paul Williams' book. It's free on archive.org. Anybody can read it. This man was deep. He spent the most of his life teaching in the Catholic Church. He was a well-written reporter. He reported wrote articles in places like the Washington Post, and he appeared on Fox News. And very, very well-known guy. And he stumbled across Operation Gladio too. And so he started doing all of this research, wrote this book. And so when I looked up stay-behind units, Operation Gladio came up. And so I'm reading his book. And what pulled me into this rabbit hole is that, I don't know, most of the way through the book, he talks about how on the 2nd of August, 1990, President of Italy, Andreotti, goes on national television. And that's the day I flew into the Rome airport to live in Italy for 3 years. I was going to be stationed there at San Vito Air Base.
That sounds like synergy.
Yeah. Okay. So I know this date, like, it's like seared into my brain, because having been in the Air Force and traveled quite extensively, I had never been in an airport where when I got off the airplane, at about a 5-to-1 ratio, there were carabinieri everywhere with machine guns. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And that's the same day that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, which is why they were on high alert.
Wow.
So that day in my brain is like seared in my brain. And I'm like,
Wow.
wait a minute. I was there in Italy the day he talked about, and for the first time in Europe, was revealed. And people have the misunderstanding that Operation Gladio was only a European thing.
Yes, they do.
So so it was a requirement. Danielle Ganser wrote a book called NATO's Secret Armies. And just to go back in time, back to World War II, to give you a 5-minute overview of what it is. Hitler, chief of intelligence for the Eastern Front was Reinhard Gehlen, General Reinhard Gehlen. His assistant was Otto Skorzeny. Now, those three people are pivotal in the creation of stay-behinds, because the stay-behind units were developed and implemented throughout all of the Eastern Front. As Hitler moved towards the Soviet Union, he set up these stay-behind units, with Otto Skorzeny being the trainer and Reinhard Gehlen being the intelligence coordinator, right? Now, what's really important about this, and I'm going to bring in the English history here, the first known use in history of stay-behind units was in the Boer War in Southern Africa. So the British goes down there to, back in the Cecil Rhodes time frame, they go down there to basically steal the gold and the treasure in the Boer area in Southern Africa. And they get defeated by the Boers, who were just like, almost Stone Age farmers. They didn't have modern weapons or anything. But what they did have was a tactic called a stay-behind unit. So they actually buried weapons. They heard through the grapevine that the British had landed, and so they were preparing a defense, because they had already found gold over in the like Rhodesia area. So they knew what was going to happen. They do their burying of their weapons and everything. And so as the British came into their area, their soldiers came in, took up their weapons, and attacked them from the rear. And they were able to defeat the British. Well, there was a reporter with the British, and his name was Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill saw this tactic and knew that was something. And he goes on to be in the War Department and Britain, and yeah. And so there's a story of the 5 sisters, the Mitford sisters. Have you heard about them?
Well, I have. My fear is that we might not have time to cover everything. So I want to make sure that our viewers are completely au fait with what Operation Gladio is, right?
So,
we'll come back to the Mitford sisters, can we? Or
yes.
is it so integral?
No. Well, no, because that's how it is surmised that how, because they were so close to the Churchill family, and they were also one of them dated or was a girlfriend, if you will, of Hitler. There is pictures of her. So they believe that the tactic and the communication was there, and that's how that information was passed on to the Germans, and how they even knew about
I got you. I've got you.
Yeah, so there's like a continuity there.
Right.
So anyway, now we've got the tactic, we've employed it. And as the Russians did start coming back and pushing the Germans back into Germany, there were cells on the stay-behind unit concept that was activated. Well, do you know where one of the biggest concentrations was? In Ukraine. And do you know who ran them? Stetsko and Bandera, who are the like the granddaddies of the modern Azov and Reich sector Nazis that have been involved in the current Ukrainian.
Interesting, because it seems like the same playbook over and over again, right?
Yes.
The objective was to, at the time we were told, well, that we were told now, was to counter an invasion of Europe by the Warsaw Pact, right? That was the aim of it, and obviously involved NATO, United States, CIA. But I think the involvement of the Vatican in itself, very, very involved, right? Financially. So there was a lot of money to be made from this. And the other thing that I want to make sure that we absolutely cover is the false flags, right? And the amount of deaths that they were prepared to use as collateral damage to conduct this. So that was the original idea. It was to counter an invasion, right? Tell us about the Vatican involvement.
So I'm not even, I will go with the official story that was what they told us, but I am not convinced that was ever actually the real. I believe that was sold to the governments as what they were supposed to do, because here's the other piece of this that always gets left out. Paul Helliwell, who was at the OSS, precursor to the CIA, he is over in China with Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek is known and famous for being the general, the warlord general, Chinese general, that when the British, who always seems to focus around this, was taking Indian opium and selling it into China, which you had the Boxer Wars, Boxer Rebellion, Chiang Kai-shek paid for his army by selling opium. So Paul Helliwell is over there, an American colonel, and he's in the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. And he calls up Alan Dulles, who is in Switzerland for the OSS and soon to be the CIA director. And he says, "Hey, Alan, you know what's going on over here? They've got all this opium over here, and Chiang Kai-shek is selling it to the Chinese to make money. And he's using that money to buy weapons." And Alan Dulles goes, "Oh, heck, that's a great idea." So after World War II is drawing down, Alan Dulles, who knows Reinhard Gehlen, gets in touch with Reinhard Gehlen and Otto Skorzeny. And he tells them that he has the idea of creating this stay behind concept all over the world, not just in Europe.
It's all over the world.
Pay for it by selling opium. Because how else are you going to get the guns?
Right.
Well, if you're going to sell illegal drugs to people all over the world, and you're going to use a Chinese warlord to do it, you have to have a navy, and you have to have weapons, and you have to have airplanes. And none of it can be on the books because it's all secret. That's where the Vatican came in. The Vatican is going to money launder all of that money from selling opium all over the world in order to fund the stay behind units, the training for them, and the equipment that is going to go. So Italy alone had over 400 weapon cache stashes all over their country that eventually was discovered and admitted by Andreotti on August 2nd, 1990. Germany had it. Agenter Press is what it was called in Portugal. Belgium had it. And Turkey has it. Turkey still has them. They're called Grey Wolves. They are known somewhat differently by different names in every country over there, but every single country there, Daniel Ganser said that there was a secret agreement by every country that entered NATO that you had to have stay behind units. It's kind of like your
yeah. Thing is, people listening to this may think, oh, well, okay, it was something that had to be done in order to protect us, blah, 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 blah. They used deep criminality, assassination, murder in order to achieve their objectives, didn't they?
So the Bologna train station bombing in Italy, and what they did was, to me, this is the worst part of it.
I agree.
They made up communist organizations. The Red Brigade, people still believe today, was really associated with the Soviet Union communist movement. It was not. It was from the very beginning a group of intelligence agents that called themselves the Red Brigade. They got workers. They just came out of Mussolini's fascism and the exploitation of workers. They got workers to believe that they were creating a workers' movement. They called it the Red Brigade. Then they basically advertised it as being communistic in nature, and then used the Red Brigade, their armbands. Instead of them actually being this group of Red Brigades, it was actually the Gladio cells that were activated. They put on the Red Brigade armbands. They blew up train stations. They blew up banks. They mass murdered people in terrorist activity. Now, if you fast forward after the fall of the Soviet Union to 1991, well, if you are absent a boogeyman because the Soviet Union all of a sudden doesn't exist anymore, do you know what they did then? They pivot to radical Islamic terror. And that's the whole reason that the Kuwaiti invasion happened. That was pre-coordinated with the U.S. ambassador in Iraq to tell Saddam Hussein that he was able to attack Kuwait and no one was going to do anything about it. Because as soon as he attacked Kuwait, all we ever heard, both in Europe and the United States, is that they hate us because of our freedom. Well, anybody that lives in our countries knows we don't have freedom. We pay taxes on everything and everything. Those people didn't hate us because of our freedom.
You're blowing my mind this morning. And the reason why is because what you're depicting is basically very little has actually changed, even though we were told Operation Gladio ended 1990. That's what we were told, 1952 to 1990. But very little has changed. And one of the things I think people struggle to understand or believe, Roxanne, because we even have that now, is people struggle to believe that a state would turn on its people, would be prepared to kill its people to further its political means. 80 plus people were killed in the Bologna train attack,
so
right?
Your two bombings, here they are indicative of exactly how they do it. So the day those bombings happened in England, there was a training exercise going on.
You're talking 7/7 now, aren't you? Yes, there was a training exercise going on, and that's
that
common,
was an
isn't
Operation Gladio.
That was, did you say?
Yes, it was.
7/7 was part of Operation Gladio.
Yes.
Wow.
Every bit of it was pre-planned, and it was done in order to manipulate the country. They did it in Spain with the train bombings. It has happened all around Europe. In the disco bombing in Germany, every single one of them was Operation Gladio. And it was done to create the narrative of radical Islamic terrorism so they could manipulate us. 9/11 was one. The Boston bombing in the United States was one. This is a premeditated controlling mechanism in order to get populations to do what they want and to psychologically traumatize us.
I mean, the thing is I know what you're saying is right, but it's very hard for people to understand because for the most part, I believe people are good. They can't understand the machinations of these wicked people who want us to turn on each other. I mean, but ultimately, what is the end goal of this, Roxanne?
Okay. So what I didn't cover, and we could come back and cover it later, is a long time ago at the end of the 1800s, you had the British Round Table. You had Cecil Rhodes, Balfour, Oswald Mosley, that whole group. They were made up of eugenicists and very evil people without souls. And they decided back in the late 1800s that they were going to create two mechanisms. And for us, for simple conversation, it was going to be a left and a right. And they were going to create Bolshevikism. And if you go back and watch the fund and follow the money, you can find out that London and New York City funded Lenin and Trotsky to go into Russia and destroy the Tsar. We also funded Hitler together, and we also created FDR, right? So now we have the left and the right. That was their creation. Because people know if you actually look into fascism, there's nothing on the right about it. It's actually a far left dictatorship type operation. So, but they convinced us that there is a left and a right, and that was to corral us or push us towards what Joseph Farrell calls in the book, The Third Way, a third way to be able to manipulate us. And when you go back and you look at who made those decisions, you have people that are like veterinarians, which are all about interbreeding. You have species, creating different species. You have and experimenting on people. You have Bernays. You have all of the psychological operations,
Right.
and so
Mr. Advertising.
yeah,
Absolutely.
all of those people got together, and they were very evil people. There is a certain amount of Satanism and control in every one of their backgrounds, but it's so much bigger. All of the nonprofits, you're probably very familiar with the World Wildlife Fund. It was created by the prince in the Netherlands and Charles when he was a prince. That organization is a large, their Club 1001 was a large entity in manipulating post-imperialist Africa. Their idea was to create controlling mechanisms in Pan America, Pan Europe, Pan British Empire, Pan Asia. And they're going to have a literal roundtable of men sitting, deciding what all goes on in the world. And they were going to use Africa as a slave colony to feed all of this. So when all of the people pulled out of Africa in the quote unquote colonial sense, all they did was send NGOs in there. They sent NGOs
That's
like the
right.
World Wildlife Fund,
Yes.
and they used that to manipulate those people, and they designated all of their resource-rich areas as national parks and stuff like that. And it was just the World Wildlife Fund and the IMF and the World Bank taking control over those countries where before there was visible colonialism. Now there's still colonialism. It's just cloaked as for the good of the country under these NGOs and World Bank apparatuses.
What you're saying is absolutely mind-blowing. I'm going to have to bring you back for a longer period and do it, because it's evident that what you're reflecting on is still happening to us.
It
And
is. Every overthrow of a government, every coup that is, the coups that are going on in Africa. So a cousin of Operation Gladio is called Operation Condor, for your audience if they want to do the research. Operation Condor was the exact same thing that was happening in the rest of the world, but it was happening in Latin America. We overthrew every single government in Latin America except for two, British Guyana and Belize, and both of those were British colonies.
Mel says, great to have Roxanne on, explaining so many tips of the iceberg for us to go away and research ourselves. You see, the thing is that many people have no idea that there is this alternate universe that is actually operating, and we're not part of the club. That's why we need people like you, Roxanne.
We're
we need people like,
not part of it.
We're definitely not part of the club, but we need people like you who have an understanding about how this works, because some of the stuff you said today, I've seen some of the comments, people are like, well, that makes sense. And that's the thing about truth, isn't it? Is
Yes.
that when somebody says it, you know, it hits you, doesn't it?
So my thing in doing, I've read, by the way, I think I'm up to 87 books just about this topic. There's and I am going to produce the list of the books because there's so many of them. Here's another organization. This organization right here is called the World Anti-Communist League. This book's called Inside the League. This book takes you and explains to you an apparatus called the World Anti-Communist League, which of course, who wouldn't be in favor of the World Anti-Communist League, right? This organization was created by the Eastern European war criminals during World War II that skinned babies alive. It was created by the Japanese war criminals like what's his name? I'm going to forget his name in a minute. But two of the worst, Tsukumo, anyway, they're Japanese names. Two of the worst war criminals in Japan that was killing our soldiers in the Bataan Death March. And they collected all of these. Chiang Kai-shek was intimately involved in this. Reverend Moon out of South Korea, who, by the way, was in a prison for sexual pedophilia in the northern sector of Korea.
Roxanne doesn't mess around,
Yeah.
right? She doesn't mess around. The amount of requests in our chat for you to come back, she hasn't even left the stage yet, people. Roxanne, you and I are going to have to do a proper deep dive, like a proper hour-long conversation, because it's evident that you have so much to bring to the table right now. And it's unfortunate that I have to let you go, but that's the way it goes. Anything you want to leave us with, just to leave people pondering?
I would ask everybody to read Operation Gladio, get familiar with the terms and what the concept is, and it will be a lot better. I have two terms. Well, I have one that you have to understand. Follow me on X. I have a link. A Swedish follower of mine takes all of my 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do a class for an hour every day on X in Spaces. And there's a hyperlink on my pinned profile. Go to that. And I did a round the world Operation Gladio tour of what it looked like in all of the countries, not all of them that it's been in, just a sampling of it. So go there and then understand this one term, international syndicate. Everybody gets hung up on who's behind all of this today. So instead of saying it's all of the Jesuits or it's all of the whatever, all of the Jewish people or all of the bankers, it is an elite group. And you have to get away from people trying to put words in your mouth. You just call it the international syndicate. And then we can put that here and we can talk about the actual operation. We can go back and look at who's in the syndicate after you understand what the operation is.
Magnificent stuff. Linda, I can assure you, Linda says, I love your shows. Would it be possible to make this segment into a short video? There's so much credible info. It would be a great short video to share. Absolutely, Linda, that will be done. Roxanne is an absolute star. We love her and we will absolutely be bringing her back. Thank you, Colonel, says everybody. Yes, this lady is indeed awesome, Sean. Indeed, she is. Everybody, this is the absolutely tremendous. She's a former colonel, but she is a truth seeker, an absolute truth seeker. Thank you for joining us this morning, Colonel. Wonderful to have you with us. Take good care of yourself. How magnificent is she, people? She's absolutely wonderful. She's joined dots.
It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.